Every night, regardless of the weather, someone wanders down our neighborhood and whistles quietly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or kitchen when they pass by, and it always begins at 3:03. The sound begins faintly, perhaps near the start of the lane where Carson's house is. We're approaching the middle of the street, so the whistling passes us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen at night to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like it, and we'd be in trouble if they caught us out there. But they were never too rough on us since we always followed the big rule. We had one rule: never try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6, and I adore it. The houses are small but well kept, with spacious yards and plenty of room to explore. There are many youngsters my age here. I turned 13 in October. We grew up together. In the summer, we always play Farsquay in the cul-de-sac or go from one back porch to the next. This was a great spot to grow up. I'm old enough to notice it, and there are only two weird things here: night whistling and good luck. The whistling didn't annoy me much. As I already stated, I was unable to hear it from my bedroom. But my parents don't enjoy talking about it, so I stopped asking questions. My father is a strong, tall, and calm man. He has an accent since moving to the United States as a child. His family, my grandparents, are from the islands, as they call it. My father only becomes agitated when the whistler sounds. He speaks a little faster, his eyes move faster, and he encourages us not to worry about it too much and to always remember the one big rule: don't peek outside when the whistler passes by. We couldn't look if we wanted to. See, every window has shutters on the inside, which are thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and lock to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a little lock similar to those seen in diaries. My father locks the shutters every night before we go to bed and keeps the key in his room. I'm not sure what my mom thinks about the whistling. I saw her in the living room before 3:03 when the music started. I could see her if I opened my door an inch. She doesn't go out often. At least, I haven't seen her very much. But once or twice a month, I believe she sits out there on her big red couch and just listens. The whistler plays the same tune every night. It's simultaneously cheery and frightening. Remember how I mentioned that there are two unusual things about where I live? Aside from our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is quite lucky. It's difficult to describe, and my father dislikes us discussing it, but nice things tend to happen to people around here very frequently. Usually, it's tiny things: winning a radio contest, receiving an unexpected promotion at work, or discovering some arrowheads buried in the yard. You know, the authentic sort. The weather is pleasant, and there is no crime. Everybody's gardens blossom brighter in the autumn. My mother described living here as a million little blessings. But my sister Nola is the main reason we're staying here, and why we relocated here in the first place. She was born with a serious lung condition. We couldn't even bring her home after she was born, only see her at the hospital. She was really little. I recall being little in comparison to the other newborns. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into this house to be closer to the hospital. Nola began to improve almost immediately after we moved here. The physicians could not figure it out. They attributed it to whatever they were doing, but we could tell they were perplexed. My folks knew. Even I knew. Nola's recovery was only one of the many small mercies we received for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we discovered that for every minor miracle that happens here every day, there are sometimes awful things that happen. However, they only occur when you look for the whistleblower. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They arrive with macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're quite friendly. 7 years ago, when we moved in, 4 people showed up. The committee made small chat, handed me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they took additional precautions. The committee then asked to talk with my parents in private, so I was sent to my room, where I could still hear practically every word. The welcoming committee told my parents how beautiful the neighborhood was, the kind of nice that is difficult to describe. Then they told my parents about the much more difficult to explain whistling that started every morning at 3:03 and finished at 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my dad that the whistling was silent and would never harm us as long as we didn't search for what was producing the noise. This was the bit they emphasized, and I pressed my ear against the door, trying to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their fortunes altered, sometimes cruelly. A black cloud would hang over everybody who gazed. Anything that could go wrong did. The committee brought over a manila envelope with newspaper clippings, stories of vehicle accidents and wrecked lives, public fatalities, and bizarre accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my father, but the light goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. I could tell my mom wasn't taking it seriously. She continued questioning if it was a trick on their new neighbors. At one point, my mother became enraged and accused the committee of attempting to scare us out of the new home. She even inquired if they were racist because my father is from the islands. My father reassured her, telling her that he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and only wanted to help us. He added that he grew up hearing stories like this from his mother and was aware that unusual things were among us. Some of those weird things were pleasant, while some were bad, but the majority were simply different. After the committee left, Dad went to the hardware shop and purchased canvas blinds, latches, and locks, which he then placed on every window in the home after dinner. That first night in our new home, I slipped out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my father reclining on the living room couch, cradling my newborn sister. My father held up his finger in emotion while patting the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. We heard the whistle at 3:03. It came and passed, just as our neighbors predicted. The whistling returns each night, but we never look, and we count our million small blessings every day. Nola can breathe on her own and has matured into a strong, intelligent young woman. My father even joined the welcoming committee. We rarely get new neighbors. Why would someone want to leave? However, when a new family comes in, my father and the committee deliver the macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can usually tell by the look on my father's face when he returns whether the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be receiving new neighbors very soon. Recently, a family moved in exactly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, died at the age of 105. She enjoyed a nice, long life. Our new neighbors felt like they'd blend in nicely. They believed in the welcoming committee and followed my father's suggestion about shutting the shitters because they had a little child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence my father refused to show us, I'm sure it was very compelling since our neighbors got along well for the first month. When our new neighbors needed to leave town, they sent their kid Holden to stay with us. He was 12, a year younger than me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but the moment his parents dropped him off after dinner, I knew it was going to be a rough night. Do you know who was always out there whistling every night? Holden questioned as the grown-ups exited the room. The 3 of us were seated in the den, watching a Disney movie on the television. My sister and I exchanged glances. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister inquired. "No way. He's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tightened up. "We don't talk about it," I said. "Let's go into my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing video games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies, a typical sleepover, but I could tell Holden was getting antsy. After my parents wished us good night, locked the blinds and went to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to Nola and me on my bed. "Have you even tried looking?" he inquired. "It's almost time." Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any notion of a bedtime. I was surprised to realize he was accurate. It was nearly 3 a.m., and I moaned, "We don't." "See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blind every night and hides the key." He continued to ignore me. "So does our dad," Nola replied. "No," Holden responded. "He doesn't." "You saw him do it," I added, my tone rougher than I intended. Holden grinned. "Your father locks the blinds, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it on his regular keychain." "So?" I questioned, concerned. I knew what he was going to say next, since I had noticed that after all these years, my father no longer bothered hiding the key because he knew we were serious. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peered into the room and noticed your father's keychain on his nightstand, and maybe I went to borrow the key to the blinds." Nola and I exchanged stares, and his grin widened. "You're lying," I replied. Holden shrugged. "Check if you want. Simply open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain on the nightstand." "Stay here," I instructed both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I ran straight to my parents' room but paused at the door. If Holden hadn't lied, my father would be furious. I was afraid just thinking about it, but even more so by an open window with a whistler right outside. I opened the door just an inch and peeked inside, but it was too dark to see. I took a big breath and walked into the room. I stopped dead in my tracks after 2 steps into the darkness. The whistling began, and I could hear it plainly in my parents' room. I never realized it, but they must have heard the sound every night since we came in. They never informed us. I don't believe I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling get closer, unsure if I should switch on a light or call for my father. Soft sounds from the living area returned me to reality. "Nola!" I yelled as I ran out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing by the entrance door, next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I saw him fumbling with a lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He had the key. Holden gave a brief laugh. Nola stood next to him, huddled up, scared yet perhaps inquisitive. The whistling could now be heard directly outside our house. I assume I made a sound, but I can't remember. Time seemed stuck. The clock hands fastened to the face, but I found myself moving. I'm not fast, and I've never been athletic, but I somehow traversed the distance between myself and Nola in a moment. My gaze was fixed on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it would release. I heard the snap of it begin to elevate, and I heard whistling on the other side of the glass. But I had my arms around Nola and turned us so she was looking away from the window. At the same time, I pressed my eyelids closed. The blinds whipped open. The whistle ceased. I could feel Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Do not turn around." We were positioned so that she faced back into the hallway and I faced the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod against my shoulder. I reached out with my arm not carrying Nola and attempted to touch Holden. My hand touched on his arm. He shook worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. I reached past him, cautiously feeling for the window. It was still sealed shut. The glass felt cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been at that time of year. I reached up the window, looking for the string to the blind. The glass warmed up as I extended further, and a subtle hum returned to my fingertips. I tried not to worry about what was on the other side of the window. Finally, I grabbed the cord and yanked the blinds closed. I opened my eyes. In the weak light streaming from the kitchen, I could see Holden, pallid and little, peering out the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned to face me and screamed. Everything became a whirl of movement. Light came to life in the hallway and living room. My parents' footsteps skitter over the hardwood floor. I did not turn around to look at them. My gaze was locked on Holden. He looked pale, had bit his lips so hard that a thin red line of blood ran down his chin, and had wet himself. "What happened?" my father questioned from behind me. I managed to turn away from Holden and gaze back. He gazed. I'd never seen my father so terrified before, but that night, I saw an old, ugly horror sewn on his face. A parent's worst worry. "Just Holden," he whispered to me. I nodded. "Yes." My father let out a sigh. He seemed so relieved. I almost expected him to cheer. But then he glanced to Holden, and my father's expression altered. I wondered whether he felt awful for being happy that Holden was the only one who looked. A knock on the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mother urged. She stood at the doorway of the hall. I'd always assumed she was a skeptic and only teased my father about the windows and the Whistler. But that night we were all convinced. I observed that both of my parents were holding baseball bats, which they must have stolen from their bedrooms. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden pleaded. My father came over to him and hugged him tightly. "We won't," he promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." This time, the knock was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden shouted again, and Nola wrapped her arms around my throat. My mother walked over and knelt next to us, hugging my sister and me tight. "Call the police," my mother murmured to my father. The knocking ceased abruptly. My father looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think?" He was stopped off by furious knocking, which faded into a nice tapping sound. "Police," someone called from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mother's, as if a parrot were repeating her remarks. My mum drew us closer. "Police? Please stop," she whispered. "I don't think summoning them will help," my father responded. "How will we know when they are at the door?" The knocking returned, stronger than before. The door rattled, then stopped. After a while, I heard another knock, but this time it was from our back door. We all looked towards the back door, but the knocking quickly returned to the front door. Front to back to front, loud, quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound came from both doors at once. Big, hefty blows, like a sledgehammer. Then something started pounding against all of the house's windows and walls. It seemed as if we were living within a drum with a dozen individuals attempting to play simultaneously. Or as if we were a turtle and something was trying to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden cried. The knocking stopped. "I won't tell," Holden murmured, peering at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw." Just please leave." We waited for about a minute. Then we heard it. A faint knock from the window Holden had glanced through before. Holden began to cry, wailing like a prisoner witnessing a gallows being built outside his cell. My father held him, stroked his hair, and never lied to him. Never told him everything would be fine. The tapping at the window continued for the remainder of the night. We congregated in the living room for I'm not sure how long. Eventually, my mother attempted to take us children into my room while my father remained to guard the door. However, the knocking resumed as soon as we entered my bedroom. It was so loud that it could not be ignored. I was concerned the door couldn't handle it. We returned to the living room, and the knocking ceased. Only a tap on the window remained. Neither of us slept that night. The tapping ended at 7 a.m. That's approximately the time the sun rises here. We waited another 2 hours before my father opened the blinds in one window. He made us all return to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door and then come back in. "Okay," he said, "it's done." Holden's parents returned around lunchtime. My parents escorted Holden to his place, where they all spent some time together. Nola and I had watched through the window. She remained by my side throughout the day, occasionally holding my hand. When my parents returned, they were grim but refused to tell us what they had said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we spent the day together, ordering pizza and watching films. That night, everybody slept in my room. Nola and my mother were in the bed with me, while my father sat in the chair he had pulled over. There was no banging that night or any subsequent nights. We didn't see Holden or his parents for the rest of the week, but on Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them pack up all day after school. What strikes me the most is how wary Holden and his parents appeared. All three had the same pale complexion, harsh jaws, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could see something was seriously wrong. Holden and his family had left before sunset. I recall what the initial welcoming committee told my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who sees the Whistler dies, but even those who live have the light go out of them, and the remainder of their lives are full of misfortune. A million small tragedies. I suppose Holden's parents must have looked, either to console him if they did not believe, or to share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, joyful, young, and living, and I wonder if I had been slower and she had looked out the window that night, I would have looked as well. To soothe her and share the strain. I'm relieved I don't have to find out though. We still live in that house and neighborhood. Every night, we can hear our Whistler walking past. The blessings, luck, and pleasant things here are simply too good to leave. But we're cautious. We don't bring guests over to stay the night anymore, and my father keeps the key to the blinds hidden extremely securely. Not that I've been looking. Some things you don't have to look for,